Throughout history, war has been an inescapable part of human civilization. From ancient city-states to modern superpowers, the causes of war have varied, from political, religious, and economic tensions to territorial ambitions and ideological battles. But regardless of their nature, wars often shape the course of history, forever altering the lives of those who experience them and the trajectory of the world itself. In this video, we'll take an in-depth look at some of the most significant wars in human history, exploring what caused them, their outcomes, and how they reshaped the world. We begin in ancient Greece, where two powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, were locked in a struggle for supremacy. The Peloponnesian War, fought between these two forces, lasted nearly 3 decades and had profound consequences for Greece. But what sparked this monumental conflict? The cause of the war lies in the complex network of alliances and rivalries. Athens, a democratic powerhouse, was expanding its influence and leading the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states. Sparta, on the other hand, led the Peloponnesian League, an alliance built around the militaristic city-state of Sparta and its allies. As Athens grew more powerful, Sparta and its allies feared the expansion of Athenian power and influence, leading to a series of confrontations. And the war can be divided into several phases, but at its core, it was a clash of ideologies. Athens' naval dominance contrasted sharply with Sparta's military might on land. Initially, Athens, under the leadership of Pericles, relied on its superior navy to outmaneuver the Spartans. However, the conflict took a devastating turn as the war dragged on, with both sides suffering enormous casualties. In the end, it was not a single battle, but a slow collapse. A plague struck Athens, killing Pericles and weakening its military. Sparta, with the help of the Persian Empire, was able to block Athenian naval power. After years of destruction and death, Athens finally surrendered in 404 BC. Sparta emerged victorious, but the war had severely weakened the Greek world. In the end, no city-state could claim true dominance, and Greece would soon fall to the rising power of Macedonia. Fast forward a few centuries, and we find ourselves in the heart of the Mediterranean. The Roman Republic and the mighty Carthaginian Empire were locked in a series of brutal conflicts known as the Punic Wars. These wars were driven by both political ambition and economic rivalry. The First Punic War broke out in 264 BC, and it was primarily about control over Sicily, a strategically valuable island. Rome and Carthage had been expanding their empires, and the Mediterranean was increasingly becoming a battleground for dominance. The Romans, initially inexperienced in naval warfare, learned quickly and defeated the Carthaginian fleet, forcing Carthage to cede Sicily and pay reparations. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, would become the stuff of legend, as the Carthaginian general Hannibal famously led his army, including war elephants, across the Alps to invade Italy. His military genius was unparalleled, winning several victories at places like Cannae, where he decimated Roman forces. Despite Hannibal's success, Rome managed to outlast Carthage, thanks to the strategy of Roman general Scipio Africanus, who defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, was a final, brutal attempt by Rome to destroy Carthage completely. After years of tension and provocations, Rome launched a siege on Carthage, ultimately reducing the city to ruins and annexing its territory. Carthage was no more. The Punic Wars left Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, and it laid the groundwork for the Republic's transformation into the Roman Empire. The destruction of Carthage sent a clear message to the ancient world. Rome was a force to be reckoned with. Let's now move to medieval Europe, where a conflict known as the 100 Years' War would shape the destiny of England and France. This war, which lasted from 1337 to 1453, was not one continuous battle, but a series of conflicts between England and France, intertwined with complex dynastic claims, territorial disputes, and national identities. The war's roots trace back to English claims to French territories, especially after the death of the French king Charles IV in 1328, who left no male heir. Edward III of England, being the grandson of Philip IV of France, asserted his right to the French throne, leading to the outbreak of hostilities. On the battlefield, the English achieved notable victories, such as at the Battle of Crécy and Poitiers, where longbowmen decimated French cavalry. But it wasn't just knights and soldiers who played pivotal roles in this war. A figure that would forever change the course of history emerged from the chaos. Joan of Arc, a young French peasant girl who claimed to have been divinely inspired to lead France to victory. Her courage and leadership turned the tide in favor of the French, culminating in the lifting of the siege of Orléans in 1429. Despite Joan's eventual capture and execution by the English, her legacy lived on. The French eventually drove the English out of France, and by 1453, the war was effectively over, with France reclaiming most of its territory, including Bordeaux, the last English stronghold. The 100 Years' War had profound consequences for both nations. For France, it solidified national identity and centralized power under the monarchy. For England, the war's aftermath contributed to internal strife, including the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars that would plague the kingdom for decades. Cheated next, we journey across the Atlantic to the American colonies in the late 18th century, where tensions with the British Empire were simmering. The American Revolution was sparked by a growing sense of injustice among the colonists, who were frustrated by British taxation without representation and the tight control over their economic and political freedoms. The revolution began in 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord, where British forces clashed with colonial militias. The colonists, led by figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, took up arms in defense of their rights. But beyond taxation, the war was fueled by a larger desire for independence and self-governance. The conflict was not without its challenges for the colonists. The British military, though formidable, was fighting far from home. Washington's leadership, along with the determination of ordinary citizens and the support from France, proved crucial in securing key victories. The turning point came in 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga, where American forces defeated a significant British army. This victory convinced France to officially ally with the colonies, providing essential military and financial support. By 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and the British formally recognized the independence of the United States. The revolution not only secured freedom for the colonies, but also inspired movements for democracy and self-determination around the world. The birth of the United States set a new precedent for governance and marked the beginning of a new era in world history. And on the other side of the Atlantic, the French Revolution was unfolding. France, which had been a dominant European power for centuries, was undergoing its own transformation. The French Revolution was born from economic hardship, social inequality, and the influence of Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire. By the late 18th century, France's economy was in disarray. The monarchy, led by King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, was deeply unpopular due to their extravagant spending, while the common people suffered. Widespread famine and an oppressive tax system fueled the anger of the peasants. When King Louis called the Estates General in 1789 to address the financial crisis, it set off a series of events that would change the course of history. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, became a symbol of the people's defiance against the monarchy. Revolutionary fervor spread throughout the country, and by August, the National Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, establishing the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution escalated into a period of radical change, marked by the Reign of Terror, led by figures like Maximilien Robespierre. In 1793, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed, signaling the end of the monarchy. The revolution eventually gave way to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who would seize control in 1799, marking the end of the revolution but the beginning of a new French Empire. While the revolution's immediate outcome was the fall of the French monarchy, its long-term impact was immense. The French Revolution spread the ideals of democracy and equality across Europe and beyond, influencing future revolutions and the development of modern political thought. From the ashes of the French Revolution rose Napoleon Bonaparte, a military genius who sought to expand France's borders and establish a new European order. The Napoleonic Wars were a series of conflicts between Napoleon's French Empire and various European coalitions that sought to curb his expansionist ambitions. Napoleon's rise to power in 1799 marked the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars. By 1804, he had crowned himself Emperor of the French and set his sights on dominating Europe. The wars were driven by Napoleon's desire to create a European empire under French control, and at its peak, his forces dominated much of Europe, from Spain to Russia. Napoleon won numerous victories, including the decisive Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, which established his dominance. But his overreach began with the ill-fated invasion of Russia in 1812, where his Grande Armée was decimated by the harsh winter and Russian resistance. Napoleon's fortunes reversed after his defeat in Russia, and the subsequent battles led to his eventual abdication in 1814. He was exiled to the island of Elba, but escaped a year later, only to be defeated once again at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the rest of his life. The Napoleonic Wars had a lasting impact on Europe. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 sought to restore stability by redrawing European borders and establishing a new balance of power. Napoleon's legacy, however, endures in the spread of nationalist movements and the reshaping of modern Europe. Shifting gears to the United States, we find ourselves in the mid-19th century, where a deep divide between the North and South was pushing the country toward war. The American Civil War was fought primarily over the issue of slavery and states' rights, but it also involved economic, cultural, and political tensions. The Southern economy was heavily reliant on slavery, while the North had moved toward industrialization and abolitionism. Tensions reached a boiling point in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. The Southern states, fearing the loss of their economic system and political power, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederacy. The war began in 1861 with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. What followed was one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history. Major battles like Gettysburg and Antietam saw horrific casualties, and the war's human cost was immense. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 declared the freedom of enslaved people in Confederate-held territories, shifting the war's focus toward the abolition of slavery. By 1865, after General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, the Confederacy collapsed, and the Union was preserved. The Civil War had lasting consequences. Slavery was abolished, and the United States began the long process of Reconstruction to integrate the Southern states back into the Union. But the war also left deep scars, with racism and division still haunting the country for decades to come. The early 20th century was marked by an intricate web of alliances and rising nationalism in Europe. But the events of June 28, 1914, would set the stage for one of the deadliest conflicts the world had ever seen. World War I, also known as the Great War, erupted after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by a Serbian nationalist. But the roots of the war ran much deeper. The tensions between European powers had been escalating for decades, fueled by imperialism, militarism, and national rivalries. The major powers of Europe had formed two rival alliances: the Triple Entente, consisting of France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the web of alliances quickly pulled all the major European powers into a full-scale war. What followed was a war of unprecedented scale and brutality. Trench warfare, chemical weapons, and modern artillery made the battlefields of World War I some of the deadliest in history. Major battles such as the Battle of the Somme and Verdun saw hundreds of thousands of soldiers lose their lives in grueling, bloody stalemates. The war was a war of attrition, with neither side gaining significant ground for years. The war expanded beyond Europe, with fighting in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. In 1917, the United States entered the war, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. The US provided crucial military and financial support that ultimately helped bring about the defeat of Germany and the Central Powers. The war officially ended on November 11, 1918, when Germany signed an armistice agreement. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, formally ended the war, imposing harsh penalties on Germany. The country was forced to take full responsibility for the war, pay reparations, and cede territory, a decision that would sow the seeds of future conflict. World War I had profound consequences. It led to the collapse of empires like the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires, and it redrew the map of Europe. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles created resentment in Germany, contributing to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. The war also set the stage for the Russian Revolution, leading to the rise of the Soviet Union. Just over 20 years after the end of World War I, the world was plunged into another devastating conflict. World War II was the result of unresolved issues from the First War, compounded by the rise of fascist regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan. But the immediate cause of the war was Germany's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939. Under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany sought to expand its territory across Europe, driven by a belief in racial superiority and the desire for Lebensraum, living space for the German people. This expansion began with the annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia, but the invasion of Poland was the spark that ignited the war. In response, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The war quickly spread across Europe, with Germany using blitzkrieg tactics to swiftly conquer much of Western and Eastern Europe. In 1940, Germany launched an air assault on Britain, known as the Battle of Britain, but failed to break British resolve. Meanwhile, Germany turned its attention to the Soviet Union, invading in 1941 in what would become the largest military confrontation in history. On the other side of the world, Japan had been expanding its empire in Asia, and its attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 forced the United States to enter the war. With the US now involved, the Allies, comprising the US, Soviet Union, and the British Empire, launched a counter-offensive. The war raged on, and in 1944, the Allies launched D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history, liberating France from German occupation. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the US fought a brutal campaign against Japan, culminating in the dropping of atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. World War II ended in 1945 with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May and Japan in September. The war had resulted in an estimated 85 million deaths, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Europe was left in ruins, and the global balance of power shifted dramatically. In the aftermath of World War II, the world was divided into two major spheres of influence: the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War began, and the United Nations was established in an attempt to prevent future global conflicts. The war also led to the decolonization of much of Africa and Asia, and left a lasting impact on geopolitics, leading to the creation of new nations and the rise of superpower rivalry. The Cold War was a conflict unlike any other in history. It wasn't fought with conventional weapons or large-scale battles, but rather through ideological struggle, espionage, and proxy wars. The Cold War was a battle of ideologies between two superpowers, the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. After World War II, the US and the USSR emerged as the two dominant global powers, but their political ideologies were diametrically opposed. The United States advocated for democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union promoted a totalitarian form of communism. This led to a tense standoff, as both sides sought to expand their influence around the world. One of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War came during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For 13 days, the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war. Thankfully, diplomacy prevailed, and the missiles were removed, but the rivalry between the two superpowers would continue for decades. The Cold War was fought in various proxy wars across the globe. In Vietnam, the US supported South Vietnam against the Communist North, while the Soviets backed the communist regime. In Korea, the Korean War split the peninsula into Communist North and Capitalist South, a division that still exists today. The Soviet Union also became involved in Afghanistan in the 1980s, while the US backed the Afghan Mujahideen, leading to a Soviet quagmire. By the late 1980s, internal issues in the Soviet Union, such as economic stagnation and political reforms, led to the eventual collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War, and by 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved, marking the end of one of the longest periods of global tension in history. As we look back at the major wars throughout history, we see the deep impact they've had on the world. They've shaped our political systems, our borders, and our understanding of human conflict. Wars may be the result of deeply rooted tensions, but they also serve as a reminder of the destructive power of violence and the importance of diplomacy and cooperation. As the world continues to evolve, the lessons learned from these conflicts remain vital. In an age of global interconnectivity, it's more important than ever to seek peace and understanding in the face of challenges. The history of war is a history of struggle, sacrifice, and resilience, and perhaps most importantly, a history of hope for a better future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts on the wars that shaped the world and what we can learn from them. Until next time, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and stay engaged.